We sitting here talking about practice. I mean, listen, we talking about practice. Not a game, not a game, not a game. We talking about practice.
The Make Space Make Sense show. We're here, our second show, MS Squared, number 2. We're here with Marvin Ong today. We're talking about practice. Marvin's here. He's joining us from Los Angeles. If you don't know about Marvin, he's a local LA spinner. He's a big part of the FlowArts scene here in Los Angeles, as well as, you know, the rest of the world. He hosts practice sessions at least once a week, if not 2 or 3 times. He's done his own flow festivals. He's a big part of Ignite Festival. He runs Master Ong's prop shop with his family. We'll have a link down there in the description when this gets uploaded. That's for all your prop needs. If you need clubs, if you need poi. Marvin, you want to tell them?
Yeah, I mainly carry like practice props, non-glow, non-fire. Just like focusing on like more practice props because I feel like a lot of people like want to spin because they want to spin fire, you know, they want to spin because they want to spin glow at parties and stuff like that. And over the years, like I figured out like why nobody really focus on the practice, you know, just like on the practice props. And yeah, so we mainly focus on like practice props and on the importance of practice itself. Yeah.
Very cool. And that's a big reason why we have Marvin on the show today, because today's show is all about practice. How we go about practicing, philosophy on practice, and how we separate it, if we even do, from the real craft, the real art, whether it be dancing, flow arts, painting, anything where you have to practice and then you have to get up on your soapbox or what have you. So first thing that we want to go through here is like how each of us go through our practice regimen. If there is one. And yeah, Albert, do you want to talk about that first?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So basically, I happen to be pretty fortunate. My girlfriend, or fiance, or wife, or whatever, we're figuring it out. Anyway, my significant other has like she is a general manager at a studio space, so she gets me space for free to rent.
Wow.
So I've been sort of showing up every Friday. For the last like couple of years, I guess, just for an hour of just alone time where I just like put on some music and jam it out. So it's just like time in a room with no obligations and no sort of no agenda. I don't really have any like structure other than just like it's an hour every Friday, and it's. You know, that like obviously I do like a little bit of every once in a while I'll just hang out. I'll just start playing with my hands, but for the most part I'd sort of limit it to that. I'm not really that's sort of as much time as I give to the practice, I guess, as a whole.
Dave?
Different.
No, I noticed your name is Nimbus this week.
Yeah, I think we're going to go with a new name every week.
There you go. I called it last week.
So I don't even know my real name. But yeah, when it comes to practice, you know, because it's been a while since I really dug in to the whole notion of practice. So what I've been trying to figure out is how I structure things. Mainly for me, if I have a chunk of time, I do like a 10-minute warm-up, about anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes stretching. I do about 2 hours of drilling, and then about 45 more minutes of stretching. I also like to supplement practice with a variety of things. I've been going to yoga. I've been doing Pilates as well, and I also do 2 strength training days a week that are just body weight stuff. I did actually, ironically enough, hurt myself practicing, so I guess one thing that I can dig in a little bit to today is patience and knowing your limits and being really just patient with the process. But yeah, it's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, I remember reading about Jerry Rice's practice methods and how this guy was talking about just how NFL players practice, and they were saying that they don't do a ton of scrimmage games. They don't play a lot of football because that's the way they end up hurting themselves. Like the most injuries happen in the game, so they try to stay out of the game as much as possible when they're practicing.
Yeah.
Marvin?
Interesting. A couple of different ways. I try to go for like an hour, at least 2 a day, you know, and try to like calculate over the week. Sometimes I go up to like 5 to 6 hours a day, and on the weekends it's definitely like sometimes 10 hours. Like it varies, but yeah, you know, it's just,
This is why this man's on the show, because
Yeah.
I know he speaks the truth.
and that's crazy. And then before, a couple of years ago, when I practiced, I would always kind of like think like, oh, if I practice like 5 hours, I gotta, you know, be somewhere or like reach this certain level and all that stuff. And last year I was in Ohio. I kind of like hit this wall where I was like, why am I practicing? You know, like I've kind of like lost like the whole idea of like why are we all doing this in the first place? You know, just practicing in general. And I came out to the conclusion of like the whole reason is just to enjoy it, you know. And once we get so wrapped up in the next destination, like we kind of like lose touch of the whole goal. And so now when I practice, no doubt there's a voice in the back of my head telling me like, oh, I gotta juggle like 5 clubs, 6 clubs, and all this stuff, you know, like that we gotta. But I'm trying to like mute down that voice to as low as possible. Like really just like consciously think about like putting that voice to the side, and really just focusing on like how my arms feel, you know, how my fingers, and like, you know, am I hitting the same spot every single time, and really consciously think about like that basic one movement, not even the whole advanced movement, you know, but just one section of that circle, maybe, you know, like really work on that and really be conscious of that and really like just try to like enjoy and be present when I'm like practicing. And I go between props and I try to at least like after like practicing like back and forth, I'll try to like put all the props aside, turn down the music to like silent, and just like sit there for a little bit and try to like work on my breathing, like meditation. Like, and this is my first time actually trying this, starting in like January, and I can only go for like 3 or 4 minute stops. Like my mind starts like shift away, and I was like, okay, I'll turn back on the music and we'll go again. But yeah, that's my like weekly practice.
Yeah, I was reading something from Leo Babwata. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I'll throw a link.
Yeah, that video
I'll throw a link down.
great.
Yeah. And he was saying like, you know, if you don't think you have time to do that afterwards, that meditation part afterwards, he's like, just do it for a minute or 2 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, and then you'll get to a point where you start getting more comfortable with it. You'll get to a point where you say like this is silly. I'm only doing this for like a minute. Like I might as well go longer. You know, it's the starting that's really the hard part. And once you break it down into that very minute thing that like, I'll only do it a minute, and then it won't take that long. Like then you start doing it more and more, and you feel okay with it. Matt, practice?
Yeah.
Dark Matter Squad.
Yeah. Thank you. Practice for me is come in like many different shapes and sizes, and over the years, my habits have changed drastically. Kind of chaotic. The best period of like sustained regimented practice was when I was teaching. That's what gave me a stability, a date on the week, you know, and time and a place to go do the thing, and put that sort of attention into it. But when I don't have that, I find that find myself accidentally practicing constantly. Like I'll go to do one thing, get up and get in front of the mirror, and like 30 minutes later, after I've exhausted a concept for half an hour, I'm like, oh, well, okay, what was I supposed to be doing? Like, so the practice happens, but in not such a structured way. But that's just like the nature of what I do with my art form. It's just it's the way I think. Like,
attention deficitly.
yeah, right, exactly, pretty much.
Word.
Yeah, something I've been doing more of lately, though, intentionally, is visualization practice. So, like, I want to close my eyes and see my own body and imagine the feeling of where my position is, and going through all my scales and stuff in my head, and like trying to visualize from like a third point out, like, what's my body look like in these positions from behind?
I see.
In the front, and
what does Matt's body look like from behind?
So, like, a tool for that. I'm gonna grab my whiteboard for you guys.
Uh-oh.
I drew out this section of the grid, and I found that I wasn't even thinking about using it as a visualization tool. But, like, this little guy right here.
I remember this, yeah.
Right, so I found that if I just stare into it and imagine a body there in all the scales that I can do, seeing the rest of the structure there, I can, like, imagine new things that I wouldn't have found doing it. I can see the gaps, you know. Say, okay, I should go fill in this section, and that's been a fun little imagination visualization tool, like to have your grid drawn out in front of you and play it in your head.
This is another reason why you need a 3D printer, because we need a 3D rendition of the grid.
Oh my God!
Like, that'd be awesome.
Even
Matt,
if it's little.
Do you think that visualization practice helps you form more realistic visualizations of what you're actually capable of doing? Because I know a lot of times in my head, I get into the habit of being like, oh yeah, I have this awesome movement all worked out, and then kinesthetically it's completely impossible.
Yeah, I used to do that too. When I first started working on circles with levers, and I hadn't had them linked into the grid yet. I would think of these just like awesome motions, but then not realize, like, oh, my elbow doesn't let me rotate that way, or like my shoulder can't go, my arm can't go completely behind my body. Like, that's just not the way it works. But in my head, it was like, oh yeah, that totally works. So for a while, like, to kind of segue it into the way I practice, like, for a long time, I would practice a lot in my head. I would be at my office job, and I would just sit there and mentally visualize myself dancing, going through patterns and going through, just little tricks with musicality and whatnot as I was listening to music, and really visualize myself in the third person in my head. Just my space to do that is my parents' basement. I don't know why, but that's where I always see myself. And so
yeah, the hours I put into my parents' basement, just of practice, unreal.
Exactly.
So much time.
So yeah, but then I started thinking up these new ideas with circles, completely not understanding how they worked with my body, and I just cut that off. I said, this is turning practice into more like self-indulgence. Mm-hmm. This is turning practice into like how many cool shapes can I make with my body that I can't really make with my body. So I ended up cutting that out, and then I moved out here. For a long time, practice for me, for at least the first like 7 or 8 years, practice for me was like getting in front of a mirror and dancing. And then some things changed in my life that I won't talk about on camera, but I started to see how that was, to me, that wasn't practice anymore. That was just indulging in my own creativity. That was just like saying, look at these neat things I can trip myself out with, instead of saying, like, how can I expand or how can I refine the things that I have. So I was always looking for like these new cool ways to trip myself out, and that was practice for me. But then I was like, no, I wanna start refining these things so they don't look so raw, so they look clean, and also I don't want to have to think so hard about doing these things on the dance floor. Like, I want my concentration elsewhere. I don't want it on my body. I want my concentration on the music. So the body should be, it should just be clicking. Like, I shouldn't have to think about it. And that's what led me to drilling and like really getting down with drills. And you know, David really drilled this into me. He told me for years, drill, 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 and I just never did it. And then finally it clicked, and I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. Like, I don't have to think about my body anymore when I'm on the dance floor. Or like maybe I'll think about it, but it's only like 20% or so. You know, it's not at like the 80% that I was at before. So started doing that, and then I've also toyed with the cross-training stuff, going to the gym, setting aside time for dance in a space, which to me is awesome, just like Albert does. Just regardless of what you do in the studio, the foundation, step 0 is making time and making space for practice. Like there's all these, you know, different ways to approach it once you get into your space and time, but you have to make that time, you have to make that space first.
Yeah, you got to make that space make sense.
you have to assign
Yes.
the idea of dance to that space.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's incredibly important because it puts into your head the idea of attendance, you know, and that's always going to be the first indicator of success is if you're attending your thing. It's like going to school or going to a job. It helps you build the habit of practicing, you know, when there's not I've actually been dealing with this myself. I spent part of my day today searching for a studio, and it's to create that definition, that line of cleavage between, like, my life and this is practice time. Like, I step into that space, and this is no longer like, hey, I'm hanging out. No, this is my practice space. Like, leave me the fuck alone. I'm here to actually do something.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about just that term practice. And first of all, the thing that Hadouken built looks sort of like it's this like meditative practice, right? It seems like a lot of you guys are touching on the idea of just using your brain to practice, which is really bizarre because I've never done that. But it's almost Buddhist, right? It's like this, like in a mandala, like you just focus in. All you do is just like meditate on something. And the idea of practice to me is like no.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Excuse me.
Daydream into it, and it can show you parts of the grid that you wouldn't have normally arrived at. You know. So
and then I'm sorry. The like my practice is sort of all that I dance. I don't really go out that much. I don't really go to events and stuff. So like meditation as a practice, and it's the same sort of idea for me that dance is a practice to me, right? There are times where I'm just dancing, where I'm like just on the street or waiting for a train or whatever, and then there are times where I'm practicing the activity of dance, and then when that occurs, that's like the special time where, like you said, you make time and you assign it, you budget your time and your attention to this one thing you call whatever it is you call dancer.
Interesting. I'd like to share a couple stuff. Like, one is actually on Sunday I was getting home, and then there's this black dude that looks like a pimp gangster, right? And he had like 2 small dogs, whatever, with grill.
Wait, was this in Venice?
No, this was at Hollywood.
Hollywood, that's right.
Yeah. As I walked away, and he looked at me, and he like looked at my clubs, and he's like, "Oh, you juggle?" And I was like, yeah, I do. And then he's like, "Oh, Circus Soleil." I was like, yeah. And he looks at the clubs, and he goes, lots of practice. He said almost as if it was a negative connotation, almost like a, you know how you have to go to work, and you're like, oh, you gotta work it, you gotta work. And I was thinking about it, how funny why most people when they think about practice, they think about going to work, almost like a negative kind of place. Like, oh man, I gotta practice, But in reality, it doesn't have to be that way, though. Like, first of all, and the second thing I would think is, like, I'm sure all you guys know, like, for something that you love, people always say, like, oh, you don't have time, you don't have money. You make time and money for the things you love. You should find space, you find time to make it happen, and you do your practice. That's the first one I want to share. And the second part is actually, I don't know if you guys seen the movie Life of Pi. Have you guys seen it?
Not yet.
Yeah, in this movie, there was this section where the Indian girl was dancing, and the instructor was like, if you don't do it properly, how could you give yourself to the divine? And the whole movie got me like kind of like thinking how interesting, you know, that thought process was. So I started thinking like some people kind of pray, you know, some people play music, some people meditate, some people dance, some people juggle, some people spin, some people do all kinds of like stuff, like, you know, different outlets. Some people call it speak to God. Some people call it be one with the universe. Some people call it a higher consciousness. Some people call it living in the moment. They're all almost like one answer, the same place, with multiple different outlets going to the same place. Everybody's trying to reach that zone. And
the flow state.
Yeah, like I guess the flow state, you know, like, and I mean, practice is where it's at. Yeah.
It's weird. You mentioned a guy looking at your clubs and saying a lot of practice. If you look at like my clubs, like Marvin had borrowed one of my clubs the other week to juggle 4, so he had his 3 and my 1, and somebody came up to him and he's like, you have one very, very clean club. and it was like to me that was saying like, look at how much Marvin practices with his clubs, and then look at how much I practice with my clubs. I'm like his are all scuffed up and dirty and whatnot, and mine are pretty clean looking still. But before that, I was like, oh, I don't want to get my clubs dirty. I want to have really nice looking clubs. And now I'm like, oh, I want to get them as dirty as possible, like, because that's going to show to me and to other people, like, that's going to show the time that you put into your craft.
Yes.
Once you have black clubs, then you'll know that you're a master.
So yeah, same thing. Like I had my clubs, and I was like, the first time they were new, and I was like, I dinged them, and I was like, oh man. But you know, like after a couple months now, like I've kind of finally looked past the perfection, like looking club, but instead I'm like looking up in the air at those clubs coming down. It's nice. It's great.
To me, it's almost like a nice worn leather, like or like denim jeans that you wear in to your body. Like you can wear your props in through practice to give them this like unique look that only your props have.
Yeah. And another thing I really want to share is last year again in Ohio, I was like hanging out at this festival, and I was kind of depressed, you know, and I was like, I was like hanging out with all these great people, you know, and they were like, "What's up?" And I was like, "Man, I just kind of suck, man. I just suck at juggling. I just at that time I was like,
voted one of the top 10 poise spinners of 2012. Just FYI.
I started
Crappy
like
juggler.
Yeah, I started like juggling like, a couple months in, and I just kind of sucked. And they were like, "Oh," and for you guys that don't know, like I started with like glow sticking, and then I was like 6-7 hours in daily, like before I like switched over to like more other like object manipulation. And they were like, "Oh, dude, you got your glow sticking." And I was like, "Glow sticking is shit, man. Glow sticking is shit." I was like, juggling is the real shit. But anyways, like the guy who's a good friend of mine, he saw that I was kind of like down on myself, you know, just beating myself up over it, and I just couldn't believe, like, I'm putting the hours, but I'm just such a newbie, you know. But anyways, he gave me this book. He said he was reading it. I suggest that all you guys should look it up. It's called Mastery. It's by George Leonard, and it's $7 off of Amazon, I think. And the guy who wrote the book is actually a martial artist and also a pilot, and he talks about ways of being a master in whatever field you're doing, and he talks about the expectations and like stuff that you're going through, and like, you know, how to adapt, and like, and one of the biggest lessons is loving the plateau, loving the practice. And you know, and one of the biggest lessons is like all of us, especially the American society, and I mean, same with the rest of the world, that when we were born, we are taught to be #1 in school, you know, to be a rock star, and like to do all these great things, and if we don't, you know, we're nobody, you know. And so we're all pre-programmed in our head. It's like, we gotta, you know, we gotta. But that's not true, you know. It's not true. And then one of the, like I said, instead of thinking of like we gotta be somewhere, but we're actually thinking of being right here in the practice. So yeah, the practice.
You mentioned plateaus.
Yeah.
That's something. This is something like it's weird. There's so much crossover in flow arts and dance, and then you had mentioned that there's multiple paths kind of to the same thing.
Yeah.
It's weird that you call it plateaus, and dancers also call the same thing the same thing. So let's talk about that for a second. Like, what are your thoughts on plateaus, Marvin, with juggling or with flow arts?
I'm beginning to not be surprised where like you guys, you know, you guys are mostly dancers, and I'm sure you guys came from like different backgrounds, and we're approximately the same age, more or less, you know, 20s, you know, maybe 30s, like around that number. And I'm beginning to see that we're all almost kind of going to different schools when we were younger, you know, like dance, like, you know, all the glow sticking feel, you know, all this different aspect of like stuff that we want to pursue. And I've noticed that people who are vibrating on the same frequency, like almost as if they're passionate about their craft, whatever their craft may be, like over time starts to like congregate together. You know, eventually, even though they may not hang out all the time, but they kind of like bypass together. And then the same words and stuff starts repeating to me. Like, you know, I keep hearing the same stuff, even in other crafts and like plateau practice, you know, meditative, you know, all this stuff starts happening, because you can kind of like apply the same words that we are talking about, even though we're from different fields, you know, and start like kind of like learning from each other. But plateau, like it's tough. Like, I mean, like I speak about like 4 to 5 languages, I think, and I mean, juggling is like one of the hardest things I've ever learned in my life, I think, so far. And because, like, for example, I'm not too familiar with dance, but for me, like, juggling, before you juggle, you look at somebody juggle, you can feel the skill, you can look at the skill, you can feel the power, you can feel it from the guys, you know. I'm just like, holy shit, this guy is like a magician or something, whatever, the coordination. And so you think to yourself, okay, I'm gonna try to juggle, you know, and you think about it, okay, I'm gonna try to juggle. But the truth is, you know in your head that as soon as you decide to juggle, all you're gonna do is drop it. Over and over and over again. Like, that's all you're gonna do. That's all you're gonna do.
You're gonna do more dropping than actual juggling.
Yes, exactly. And then eventually you start picking up. And then, so my thing is, like, you have to decide from within that you're going to do it. That's the first thing. And the second thing, you know, is going to be your heart. And the plateau will always be there, especially for juggling itself. Is that the cascade itself, the first basic move, is already hard as it is. It takes about like 3-4 hours, maybe even longer for some people. And as you progress, you keep learning that, oh man, this mountain is so steep. As I climb for like months now, and I look over it, and I find out it's more steeper than I thought it is. As I keep going, I'm learning more how steep it is. And so that plateau thing comes in, as, you know, we could always climb the mountain and keep hoping for the peak, you know, like the view, you know, like to the top, and, you know, keep thinking about the top. But actually, why don't we enjoy being here climbing the mountain? So the plateau thing is like, every time we hit that plateau that we think we're not progressing, it's okay though. You know what I mean? It's okay to keep doing it. And for other people who I think that I've seen who are kind of like successful at the things that they do, they already know this. They already know this as a fact. They already know if they're in the plateau, they're still gonna be doing it daily, regardless, because they love it. You know, and that's what I think about plateau.
Word.
Maybe the plateau could be time to do other things with your art form, because if you're always progressing, you don't have time to teach, you don't have time to like spread the, you know, there's so many other things you can do in service of the art form that you can do during those times of plateau, you know.
That's that brings up the idea, what gets you, and this is probably going to be different per plateau and per person, but like what gets you through the plateau? Is it putting in hours, or is it like taking breaks and finding intersections and other ideas? You know, so there's many ways that people get through plateaus.
I guess one thing I'm wondering about on this is why do they happen in the first place?
That's a good question.
Yeah. I feel like it happens when your expectations are like there should be change right now. When you think that you should be doing stuff, when the work you're doing is just ineffective in evoking change, right? And like that's just. I think that has to do mostly with your approach when you plateau. You've like reached a state where you can't quite identify what your next growth steps are. But you know, my point of view on this is always just like, well, you just got to show up. I mean, like I can promise you that by just like, well, like not completely, but like you are more likely to not get it if you just leave and don't touch the art form ever again, right? I mean, obviously, a lot of inspiration comes from completely letting go, and that's always important. But obviously, you know, you need to just show up and find different. I mean, you know, like what Hadouken was saying, find different approaches to the same craft.
That leads us into a next little piece that we'll have to end with, which is the idea of burnout in your craft. Where like if you reach a plateau and you say, all right, the way I'm going to get through this is more hours, more beating myself up. You know, do you reach a point, and I know I've been at this point at least 3 or 4 times in my years of dance where I just say my brain is fried right now on dance. Yeah. Like I'm okay. That was the little timer. I said I wasn't gonna hear it, and then she puts it like right next to me. But yeah, it's like, you know, at least myself, I've come across that. I don't know about you guys, but that's something to keep in your head. It's like if you keep pounding the same thing over and over, you may end up hating it. You know, like I do IT for 8 hours a day, and I don't really enjoy it. There was a time when I enjoyed fixing computers. Now I do it 8 hours a day. I don't enjoy it anymore. And maybe it's not the hours. It could be an external motivation thing, or you know, what have you. But you know, I just think that's something to keep in mind is not burning yourself out. And like Matt said, just, you know, other services to your craft or interdisciplinary type crafts, like how I'm trying to link dance and videography right now. It's just something to do to not burn yourself out on the same thing. Yeah,
I always think burnout comes from not acknowledging how far you've come, because it's so easy just to like be like, if you can't really be grateful for all the work that you've put into it, you can't own what you already have, and you need to be able to own what you already have in order to use that as a baseline to move forward. So that's always I've always, whenever I get burnt out on any project, whether it be dance related or not, I try to step back and be like, all right, where was I like a year ago? Where was I 6 months ago? And it really, when you can try to be objective on that, even if the only accomplishment you've made in the last whole year is like reading an article online, right? Like, I mean, whatever. You're definitely doing progress, and it's, you know, some other people haven't done that. So, you know, pat yourself on the back and hold on to it.
Cool. I think that's all we pretty much have for today's show. We'll have some links down in the description, definitely for Master Ong's Prop Shop, definitely for that book Mastery. I actually have that damn book, but I haven't read it yet, Gur. But and then a few more links as well. I know we had discussed some things, but yeah, thank you guys for coming in.
Thank you, and thank you, Marvin.
Yeah, thank you, Marvin. Totally saved our ass this week. Yeah, just an FYI, I didn't mention this at the start. Lucas could not be here. He had a family emergency, so that's unfortunate. But you know, family has to come first. And yeah, we were wishing him well. We will be back in 2 weeks. Don't really know what the topic is yet, but if you join the super secret Facebook page, then you will get in on that. If you don't know what the super secret Facebook page is, ask a friend. have a dialogue with someone.
Word.
And don't just ask for a link. You know, open up to someone and ask them how they're doing, and maybe reconnect with the person you haven't spoken to in a while.
Wow.
Anywho, all right, I think that's it. Thank you guys. Thanks everybody for coming.